Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a great evening with Professor Joe Nye. And Professor Nye doesn't need an instruction. However, I will have one of my interns, David Lee, will introduce Professor Nye right away. David, come on.
Hi, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the honor of introducing our speaker today. Joseph S. Nye Jr. is a University Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus and former Dean of Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He also served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Chair of the National Intelligence Council, and a Deputy Undersecretary of State, winning Distinguished Service Medals from all three agencies. He is a world-renowned authority on American power in the modern era. His work has influenced generations of scholars and policymakers. His books, Soft Power, The Future of Power, The Power to Lead, Is the American Century Over, and Do Morals Matter? Presidents and Foreign Policy from FDR to Trump, are widely acclaimed, and his writings have appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The New York Times, The National Interest, The Financial Times, and many other political publications. Foreign Policy named him one of the top 100 global thinkers, and in a recent survey of international relations scholars, he was ranked as the most influential scholar on American foreign policy. He continues to write a regular column for Project Syndicate, whilst enjoying life on his New Hampshire farm with his wife, Molly. Please welcome Joseph S. Nye Jr.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Welcome, Professor Nye. Now, the floor is yours. At least you can give a few head start address before we get into Q&A.
Well, it's nice to be with you. And
thank you.
I will say a few things, but I look forward mostly to the conversation. I can hear myself speak anytime and bore myself, but when I'm in a conversation, I always learn something. But let me start the discussion by recapping something that I published as the lead essay in the Financial Times of London last weekend, their so-called weekend edition, which was, the title of it was Donald Trump and the Future of American Soft Power. And I think that there's a great deal of concern about what's happening to American soft power under the new Trump administration, or the second Trump administration. Just to recap quickly, what is soft power? Soft power is the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment. And it's a concept which I developed way back in 1990, when there was a widespread belief that the United States was in decline. My friend Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, was on the New York Times bestseller list. And he said the Americans were basically going the way of Philip II Spain or Edwardian England. And I thought that that was not correct. And so I tried to look at the various indices of power, and I looked at military power and compared the Americans with other countries there, and then I looked at economic power and made a comparison again. But I had a feeling that something was still missing, and it was this ability to get others to do what you want through attraction rather than just coercion or payment. And so I called that soft power. The term has become used fairly widely. I think the most surprising use, from my point of view, was when Hu Jintao told the 17th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party that China had to do more to develop its soft power. And China has spent billions on trying to develop its soft power. But the term is I think the term is fairly widely used, but sometimes people say, well, soft power doesn't matter much because it's soft. international politics is the realm of coercion and payment. And so therefore, soft power is sort of like icing on a cake, but it's not really significant. I think the trouble with that, of course, is that it depends on your time horizon, and it depends on whether you're saying that soft power is either or. If soft power is seen as a complement to hard power, in other words, if one thinks as power having three dimensions in behavioral terms, coercion, payment, and attraction, then if you can use all three simultaneously to reinforce each other, you can have a force multiplier, so to speak. Or another way of putting it in metaphorical terms, we all think in terms of carrots and sticks, but if you have carrots and sticks and sugar, you can spend less on carrots and sticks. So soft power should be seen as part of the broader dimensions of power, not as an alternative to it. But the other point that sometimes people make mistakes about soft power is they tend to look at the short term only and not the long term impacts. For example, if you ask, can hard power prevail over soft power in the short run? It's almost always yes. But if you look over a longer term, soft power has more effect than people at first believe. Stalin is allegedly said in a mocking sense, how many divisions does the Pope have? And obviously that was to imply that the Pope had no power and Stalin had much power. But notice that the papacy still exists today and the Soviet Union does not. Or another thing to look at would be to look at the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The Berlin Wall did not come down under an artillery barrage, came down under hammers and bulldozers wielded by people whose minds had been changed by their desire for open freedom of discussion and the feeling that they no longer wanted to be closed off behind the Iron Curtain. So if you take a longer term perspective, soft power often proves to be more important than hard power. And at least in both short and long term, it's an important component of power. Now, I give you this preface or this introduction to say that the article that I wrote on Saturday, for the lead article for the Financial Times, starts with the comment that Donald Trump does not understand power. And he does not understand power because he thinks only of two dimensions. He thinks only of coercion and payment. And he is basically uninterested in soft power. And that, I think, reflects his background in New York real estate markets, where everything is sort of a dog-eat-dog cutthroat competition. And I think if you look at the way he has behaved in the initial weeks of his second administration, you can see what I mean, that he doesn't understand soft power. For example, there's a great deal of attention that's been paid to abolishing the Agency for International Development. Well, the AID, Agency for International Development, represents less than 1% of the government's budget, but it earns you a fair amount of goodwill for humanitarian relief and control of disease and so forth. And the idea of abolishing it when it costs so little is not going to save large amounts of money. Elon Musk, with his Department of Government Efficiency, argued that it was feeding the AID Bureau into a wood chipper and was going to destroy it. But after you did all that, if it succeeds, you would have saved something like $40 billion. The US deficit or the US budget is in the trillions of dollars. So obviously you've given up a good deal of soft power for very little budgetary gain. Or other examples of Trump's early actions in his second administration would be his threatening to retake the Panama Canal from Panama. This is a long-standing question in Latin America. Is the United States imperialistic? If you think of threatening to retake the Panama Canal by any means, you immediately are not only creating ill will in Panama, but you're creating a revival of the suspicions of the United States through all of Latin America. Or to give you yet another example, when President Trump has said that he was going to take Greenland one way or another, and he began to browbeat Denmark, which is the titular sovereign over the island of Greenland. Here was an American president berating and browbeating a fellow ally within NATO, which was noticed not only in Denmark, but in other NATO allies. Or to give you one more example, then I'll stop my litany. President Trump's calling Canada the 51st state is a way of insulting Canada. And whether he says it as a joke or whether he really is implying that this is his long-run goal is less important than the fact that it alienates a close ally with whom we have a long undefended border. And ironically, turned out to be counterproductive. Trump didn't like Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and Trudeau's ratings had already become quite low, and his Liberal Party had become quite low as a result of economic problems at home. But after Trump started attacking Canada, Trudeau's ratings suddenly shot up again. And similarly, his successor, Mark Carney, who was the former governor of the Bank of Canada and was just nominated by the Liberals, has a chance of keeping the Liberals in power, though 3 months ago, all the polls showed that the Liberals would lose. And one of the first things that Carney said in his acceptance speech yesterday was Canada is not part of the United States, never will be, and never wants to be. So, the question is, what has Trump done to American soft power in Canada, in NATO, in Latin America, around the world with a humanitarian assistance? He's weakened it. And he may say, well, it doesn't matter. I think it does matter. And if he continues in this mode for 4 more years, I think you'll see a period where the United States will be weaker overall than it is today. It may still have a good deal of military strength, but it'll have fewer countries that want to trust American military strength in alliances. It may still have a great deal of economic strength, but it'll have fewer countries who want to accept or trust American behavior economically. So I think he is having a net negative effect on American power, even though he thinks that he's being tough. and therefore making America more powerful. So I think the gist of what I said in the column on the Weekend Financial Times was we don't know whether this is a permanent or a temporary loss. American soft power has gone through losses in the past. For example, during the days of the Vietnam War, the United States policy was very unpopular. People were marching through the streets around the world against our policies in Vietnam. And yet we recovered in the 70s and 80s under Carter and Reagan. Similarly, American soft power declines as measured by public opinion polls that ask, you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the United States, declines after George W. Bush goes into Iraq without a UN resolution or support from his allies. And so American soft power is very low again, as measured the way I said. And then it goes up again after Obama comes into power. In fact, I was intrigued that in 2008, a very important British politician said to me when I was visiting London, he said, it's quite amazing about you Americans and soft power. You were the most unpopular people in the world just a few months ago. Now you've elected an African-American president for the first time, and everybody is singing your praises. So we know that American soft power can go through cycles of ups and downs. What we don't know is whether this downturn in American soft power under Trump is going to be a cycle, or whether he'll do so much damage over the next 4 years that it's going to be hard for the cycle to turn up again. In other words, there'll be so much ill will and distrust by the way Trump has treated other countries that there'll be an unwillingness to think favorably about the United States to the same extent that was true before Trump came back for his second term. So I close the article, and I close my little talk now with the comment that we're going through a very difficult time for American soft power. That's bad for American power overall. Whether this is a cyclical turn, which will rise up again, as in the past, or whether it's a longer term slide to a lower level, nobody knows. I wrote a little memoir earlier this year called A Life in the American Century. And when it came to this question of being optimistic or pessimistic, I said that after describing all this, I still had a faint ray of guarded optimism. That's not a resounding endorsement, but it does put me on this somewhat more optimistic side of, rather than on the gloomy side. But I think whatever one thinks, we're going to see a tough 4 years for American power in general and American soft power in particular. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's a great setup for next round of Q&A. Before we get into Q&A, let me make a short comment. ICAS is not an agent of any government or foreign principles. There's no foreign funds involved in the ICAS activities. Thank you. Patrick Cronin.
Professor Joe Nye, of course, he owns the corner on the market of soft power, and so I would never question what he offers, because he's so reflective and precise, and he brings so much knowledge to these issues. I suppose I want to introduce some other ideas around the margins of soft power, such as unilateralism, and where that fits. I remember, you may recall, the op-ed, maybe it was H.R. McMaster, that America first doesn't have to mean America alone. Is that still true? Was it true then? Is it still true? But I want to come at it maybe with a couple of specific policy ideas as well. So it's not just unilateralism, but I'm thinking of the energy dominance policy, where the assumption is of the administration that if we tap fully our fossil fuels, then we can regain both economic and geopolitical clout. What they don't say is that this is coming at a cost, right? A cost of renewables, a cost of climate change. So again, is America first, America alone, and is unilateralism sustainable? And I just put this in the last policy point, and that's the issue of ground troops, something you lived through as well, even during the Carter administration, when President Carter famously tried to withdraw all of our ground forces from Korea. I think the way the budget is going right now with the Trump administration is that they want to draw down the army, the ground forces, and draw back ground forces from Europe at least. But that could roll into some ground force, at least talk about reductions from Korea. And I'm wondering how you would equate the value for American interests and for global stability of our ground troops forward, either in Europe or Asia, and not just soft power, but power in general in terms of maintaining order. So I guess I'm asking a very convoluted question, but nothing that you're not well aware of. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's an important question. By addressing soft power, I did not mean to imply that that's all that power is about. It's clearly not. Hard power is essential. And in that sense, to go back to H.R. McMaster, he's right. If you say America first, it has to be in the context of alliances. If you compare the United States with China, which is seen as the rising challenger, China has come within, let's call it 17 versus 21 trillion. So it's crept up to, let's say, 3/4 of the American size of its GDP. And if you add Russia, China's biggest ally, let's skip North Korea and skip Iran, then essentially they're worth about $20 trillion in the gross world product. If you take the United States, it alone is larger than the 20 trillion, 21 or 22. But if you add to the United States its alliances with Europe, with Japan, with South Korea, you then have over half of the world economy. And the idea that we would weaken or destroy our alliances when it just makes no sense at all. I mean, there are some people in the Trump administration who say, well, we have to draw down Europe to be able to deal with China. But Europe is an economy roughly the size of the United States. Makes no sense to alienate the Europeans. And if you ask what holds these alliances together, it's partly values and soft power, but it's also the security guarantee, the presence, and the security guarantee is made credible by the presence of troops on the ground. And in that sense, the role of American troops in Europe, in Japan, in South Korea remains as important as ever. We've seen with Putin's aggression in Europe, and we've seen with North Korea's craziness or unpredictability, and we've seen with China's beginning to throw its weight around. Countries want a security guarantee, but they want one that's credible. And credibility comes partly by having boots on the ground, and it comes partly by being trustworthy. And if Trump becomes less trustworthy, because of the diminishing American soft power. And then in addition to that, takes away the boots on the ground, you can see a major shift in global alliances.
Patrick, do you have a follow-up question?
Well, I just got a great answer from Professor Nye, so I think I just should stop there and let others in the conversation.
Very good. Sean Creamer, go ahead.
I'm going to shift a little bit to the Indo-Pacific. So as someone who studied Korea, East Asia, I guess what changes in North Korean policy would you recommend to the Trump administration to pursue? Similar to what we've done in the past with the denuclearization, pressure campaign, or try something different. We'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I wish I could give you a good answer, but I don't have one. But I'm not sure anybody does. I first became involved in this back in the 1990s when I was chairing the National Intelligence Council, and we got the initial intelligence that North Korea was developing a nuclear weapon. And we tried, as you remember, at first to have an agreement where we would help North Korea build civilian nuclear reactors as sort of an alternative to having a weapon. And of course, that didn't work. The North Koreans went ahead and built their own enrichment plant and went further toward the weapon. And the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, tried to have an accommodation with the North Koreans, and that failed. And every effort made to meet the North Koreans part way has failed. And I think in the first Trump administration, the president thought that his skillful negotiating capabilities and his personal charm would be able to convert Kim Jong-un to denuclearization. It was a very naive thought. And remember, Trump said he and Kim Jong-un had fallen in love. Well, if that's a family relationship, remember, this is a man, Kim Jong-un, who killed his own closest family. So I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to talk North Korea out of its nuclear position. I think what we have to do is have a long and patient policy of containment. Kim Jong-un may be a nasty person, but he doesn't want to see himself annihilated. And we have to make it clear that if he does attack in South Korea or does try to use nuclear weapons, that will be the end of Kim and the end of North Korea. So in that case, I'm afraid I'm pure hard power. I don't see any role for soft power.
Thank you. Do you have follow-up, Sean?
Yeah, again, going to take you in a completely different direction. We have a number of young folks online tonight or may watch this. What advice would you give to the young folks online, either as IR journeymen or interested in pursuing this line of work? What advice would you give to them before they embark on this kind of life?
Well, two things. One is get experience with other cultures and other countries. I mean, if you can spend some time studying in a different country, or at least traveling in a different country, or making good friends with somebody from another country who is in the university with you, try to understand their perspective and their how the world looks to them. I had the benefit of 2 years as a student at Oxford in England, and I met a fellow student from Ghana who we talked long into the night about whether Africa was going to develop a new form of democracy. And that got me, I described the details of this in the memoir I mentioned, but that got me interested in Africa, and I actually went and did a PhD in Africa, living in East Africa for a year and a half. That I didn't stay with Africa, and alas, Africa didn't become a new form of democracy. But that exposure that opened my mind on this was extremely valuable. And so if the extent to which you can understand other cultures, either through travel or study or friendship, that I think is crucial. And the other thing I would say, that's if you want horizontal broadening, also historical deepening. In other words, look back and study history, and you'll find that some things that look like they're new are not that new. We've seen some of this before, and then you can ask yourself, what's similar and what's different in terms of how I approach a problem today. So other cultures and earlier history would be my my recommendation.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Sig Hecker. Go ahead, Sig.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Joe, good to see you. I was just thinking, almost 40 years ago, when I started out as this rookie director at Los Alamos, I had the benefit of your advice going towards soft power and many other things. And if I didn't thank you properly, let me just say now, that was enormously helpful. Thank you.
I should thank you.
So two questions. One related to North Korea, the things that you just said, and then the second one related to Trump and Putin. The one with North Korea, one could say that Trump's outreach, to Kim at Singapore, I guess I would put that in the spirit of soft power. He basically did the important thing, saying, hey, look, you go denuclearize, and we're going to go and we, the United States, will normalize relations, and that was really the basis of the deal. But then you said, it failed to work. And certainly the implication is that Kim Jong-un walked away. Are you sure that, that we didn't get anywhere? Not that we would have denuclearized, right? That we didn't get anywhere, maybe more because of John Bolton than Kim Jong-un. Okay, so that's the first question. Yeah. The second question, I would just like to hear your comments as to soft power now with the relationship between Trump and Putin, from both sides. How do you see that? And you see that, perhaps going anywhere that might, result in some good. Thank you.
Well, it's great to see you, Sig, and you know a lot more about North Korea and its nuclear policies than I do. And you've done a heroic job of trying to figure out solutions. So I defer to you on that. But my impression is, yes, that Trump was trying soft power by cajoling Kim and attracting him and so forth. I think, and you're, again, a better judge in this, I don't think soft power is ever going to talk Kim Jong-un out of having nuclear weapons. In my view, nuclear weapons were his ace in the hole.
Oh, no, of course.
And that he was never going to give up the ace in the hole. So it may be that John Bolton made the soft power effort fail sooner, but I don't think it would have succeeded in the long term. But you can correct me on that. And I don't, nobody can know for certain because it's hard to read the mind of Kim Jong-un. On Putin and Trump, it's an interesting relationship. Trump seems to like strong authoritarians because he feels that he can do deals with them. And I think that he has a history of trying to develop a friendship with Putin. This could be helpful if Putin doesn't misread it. But if Trump doesn't misread it, if Trump misreads it and allows Putin to essentially insist on a peace treaty which undercuts or destroys Ukraine, then I think that'll be bad for American soft power and bad for European security. There are some people who are defending the Trump administration by saying that Trump is cozying up to Putin because he wants to do a reverse Kissinger, though just the way Kissinger was able to split China away from the Soviet Union in 1972, that Trump will split Russia away from China in 2025 or 6. The trouble with that analogy is that the Sino-Soviet split had been going on for more than a decade, and the Chinese and the Russians are actually fought each other on the Ussuri River. And so it wasn't what you might call a warm or close alliance. In contrast, if you look at the Russian-Chinese alliance today, each of them need the other. And while there are some differences in detail, they both have a common problem, which is how do you deal with the United States? And I don't think they're splittable the way Kissinger and Nixon were able to split the Soviets and the Chinese under Mao. So I think if Trump thinks that he's going to charm Putin into a reverse Kissinger, I think it's a lack of realism on his part, and it could be very costly if it leads to selling out Ukraine.
Yeah, Joe, if I agree with that. If I may, let me just go back and take a little different view of the North Korean situation, and that is particularly the Trump, Kim, Singapore, and on the way to Hanoi. And then actually looking back at a couple of other times during Obama administration and then during Bush administration, when it always looked like it was North Korea that was breaking the deal. What I would say about the Trump situation from Singapore to Hanoi, I do think also, and in fact, I mean, while they were doing this, I was thinking of you. I said, this is Joe Nye's soft power. And in my view of what sort of fell apart is, right, Kim Jong-un was never going to just give up his nuclear weapons, but it's much like soft power. It takes a long time, and it would have taken a long time for the Americans, and they would have had to take some risks in order to find out whether they could really get there with Kim Jong-un. And so my view was, and I wrote this in a book called Hinge Points, that each of these hinge points, what we didn't do was to stay long enough and go deep enough to actually ever really test, whether it was there. And of course, then in the end, I mean, the North Koreans never helped in any of these. First they always did something developing nuclear weapons, and missiles and so forth. And then, in the end, they walked away as well. Anyway, that's just a slightly different take, but thanks for your answer.
Well, I respect your views, because you've done an extraordinary job of trying to solve what I regard as an unsolvable problem.
And remains that right now. So.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sick.
Thank you.
Okay. Jung-Soo Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Professor Nye, you talked about the rise and fall of soft power. What do you think about the soft power status of soft power during President Biden's administration, especially when he unconditionally supported Israel committing genocide in Gaza? Did that have a negative or decreased soft power measure?
Well, I think overall the Pew polls, which are respectable international polls, show that soft power goes up during the Biden period. But at the end of Biden, as the Gaza war became more and more difficult, I mean, after October 7th, the support for Israel, I think, was widely popular after the Hamas atrocities. But as the Israelis failed to consider proper proportionality in protecting civilians in the bombardment of Gaza, I think then the Americans began to lose soft power by their providing weaponry to Israel for that purpose, which had that effect. And I think that if you compare Biden and American soft power in before the Gaza war, it was actually a big improvement over Trump. For example, there was a Pew poll in 2023 and another Gallup poll in early 24. And for example, the Pew poll asked countries whether they thought America or China was more attractive. And what was interesting is that in every continent, including Asia, the Americans came out ahead of China. But one continent where the two countries were closely tied, varying a little bit country to country, but the continent of Africa was where the two were closely tied. So I think the answer is the period that the polls for which we have good evidence were before the worst aspects of the Gaza war. And I haven't seen the polls since then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, go ahead. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you, Dr. Nye, for your insightful remarks. I'm a PhD student in international affairs at Georgia Tech, and similar to Sean, I have more of a personal development question, which is that you've had such a consistently prolific career, and one might say you've generated quite a bit of soft power yourself as an influential scholar. For you, what's the equivalent of practicing scales as a pianist would go through every day? That is, what are the daily repeatable habits that you go through every day that are faithful to your own productivity?
Well, this sounds a little bit corny, but I do try to discuss it in my in this memoir I mentioned. Keeping your curiosity alive. In other words, if you keep seeing puzzles and anomalies, you say, well, I've got to try to understand that better. I think that keeps you going. For example, around 2008, Bill Studeman, the former deputy director of Central Intelligence, came to see me. He said, "You've got to learn something about cyber." I said, "Bill, I'm an old man. It's too late." And he said, "No, but you think, or people think, you're an expert on American foreign policy, and cyber is going to become extremely important for that." And so at a ripe old age, I started trying to understand cyber. It's not that I became a cyber expert, as I sometimes say. My grandchildren will know more naturally than I'll ever know through studying it. But through effort to try to learn something totally new and strange to me, I guess I must have been age 70 or so when that occurred. I eventually be able to publish articles about cyber in referee journals. So in other words, it wasn't just that I was kidding myself, but because in referee journals, there are anonymous readers who have to check whether it's something new. I'd be tempted to try to learn AI now, except it's too late. Nonetheless, I do keep reading about AI. I'm never going to make any contributions, but it does strike me as absolutely fascinating as a field or topic. So keep your curiosity alive. And the other piece of advice that's in the memoir is don't neglect your family. Because if you work all the time, I find myself getting stale. And so keeping my relationship with my wife and my children, which meant going out on skiing trips together or hiking or fishing, so forth. They took away from work time, but to my mind, they were absolutely essential to give me the kind of core stability that I needed to tackle new things.
Any follow-up, Dan?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do often find that the theories in IR are best tested or best revealed in the interaction of my 3 young toddlers. I see it. I see it worked out again and again. There's no need to do separate statistical tests. It's right there in front of me.
You're absolutely right.
Very
Thank you.
good. Thank you. Tong Kim, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor, for doing this for us. Now, as you defined it, American soft power is obviously declining with the second term of President Trump. Now, it's not the first time tariff was cited and used in the international relations. The question is how it's going to affect the future lasting order, if you will, of international behavior. With you said Trump does not understand power, but looking at his drastic executive power and its use, and it has such a way that no one is going to stop it, or as you said, somehow American soft power has always come back. So it will come back again. But either protectionism or tariff war or trade war, none of this is really lasted very long in history of international relations. You thinking Trump's behavior and his policy will have some lasting impact on a new international order, or going back to multilateralism?
It's a great question, and I'm planning a book, which I think I'll title either World Order, an Interpretive Essay, or The Rise and Fall of World Orders, plural, and trying again to go back in history. One of the big questions about where we are now is whether this is Trump's second term is an example of another turn of a cycle, another cyclical view of history, or whether it's a long-term secular decline. And so you have cycles around the downward sloping curve. And frankly, I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. We'll find out in 4 years. But I'm more worried now than I was, let's say, during Trump's first term. And I do think he may do damage. I mean, I think his neglect of soft power and weakening of alliances may mean that American military and economic power will be influenced as well. I hope not. I mean, if you look for a silver lining on this, a lot of a country's soft power comes from its civil society, not from just its government policies. You know, if you look at Korea's soft power, South Korea's soft power, a lot of it's created by you know, K-pop, and if you look at American soft power, a lot of it's created by everything from Hollywood to Harvard and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and so forth. So these attractive aspects of a country which grow out of civil society may be why you have the ability of soft power of a country to survive cycles of bad government policy. Whether that will hold true for the next 4 years, as I said earlier, I have a faint ray of guarded optimism, but I can't give you a sure answer.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes,
Go ahead.
the question is, with this new tariff war or protectionism, even if Trump pursues his policies as he has defined it so far, it's going to take more than 4 years to start yielding, like the domestic investment in plants and manufacturing facilities. You can't do that in 1 year. So to see the benefit of it because of the tariff protection, it's going to take a long time. I don't know what Trump is getting at.
Well, Trump has a mercantilist view of economics, and which producing is more important than consuming, and he blames the fact that factory workers have lost jobs to foreign imports. But it's also true that factory workers lose jobs because of technological change, robots. And but his mind is all blaming it on the foreigners, and he thinks that the foreigners are going to produce enough revenue from the tariffs he's putting on them that that'll solve some of his budget deficit problems. My view is this is rather naive, that the amount of tariffs that you're going to collect are going to be limited after you get retaliation, and the total growth of your economy will also be limited once you get retaliation. Then that instead of a win-win, you're going to have a lose-lose. And interestingly enough, in the first 3 or 4 weeks that Trump has been talking about tariffs and threatening them, it's had terrible effects on the stock market in the US. The market went down again today because a lot of people feel that he doesn't know what he's doing, and they worry that he's going to trigger a recession, whether he intends it or not. So Trump has I think, an outdated and unrealistic economic theory, but he can do a fair amount of damage before he gets his comeuppance, because if you, as you said, to build a new plant takes several years. To unleash inflation, or alternatively to unleash a recession because of retaliation, you can do that in just a few months.
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Young-Guan, welcome. Do you have a question to Professor?
Actually, do you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I thought our conference will begin in a few minutes later, 3 minutes later. I didn't consider the summertime factor. So I just came in, and I'm very glad to hear, Professor Joseph Nye's voice, and I enjoyed reading your column, Financial Times, and it was very enlightening piece. I'm concerned about the future of American democracy. Will American institutions survive at this, turbulence in American politics for some time? Or what do you think about the future or institutional resilience of the United States?
Well, it's a great question, and obviously nobody has a perfect answer to it. If you look at what Trump is doing to weaken institutions and to turn the Republican Party into his wholly owned subsidiary, so that traditional Republicans are threatened with having a primary with a MAGA Republican who Trump and Musk will throw huge amounts of money behind. This means that the traditional Republicans are keeping their heads down and not resisting Trump. And even when some of the things that he's saying are against what they themselves had said just a year or so ago. So Trump has changed the Republican Party from a conservative party to a nationalist populist party. And that's not healthy for democracy. And he has weakened norms, for example, by defying laws and closing down agencies and firing inspector generals who are the watchdogs of departments and so forth. So I think what you're seeing is a fair amount of intimidation by the president, and that's not healthy. If you look on the more optimistic side, you could say that it's launched a number of court cases, and we'll have to see. Courts take longer, but we'll have to see how they turn out. In addition, if he follows the policy he suggested of cutting taxes and imposing tariffs, he may create inflation. And inflation was one of the reasons he got high prices, was one of the reasons he got elected. And if you go into the 2026 elections with prices high and rising, that may mean he'll lose control of the House of Representatives. Then you'll get a check and balance from the legislature as well as the judiciary. And the other point is that the American system is a federal system, and that a lot of states, less than half, but over 20, have Democratic governors or legislatures, and will put up a degree of resistance. So there are reasons to think that there may be resilience in the political culture, but it's being challenged in a way that we haven't seen before. Even Nixon, who certainly challenged the political culture at the time of the Watergate events, it wasn't as intimidating as Trump is now. So there are some causes for pessimism and some causes for optimism. And I still think that the resilience will be there, but I wish I could tell you that for certain.
Thank you. Yonggan, do you have a follow-up question?
I asked that question because what will happen in the U.S. politics will have very important and significant influence in other countries' political system. I'm concerned about the future of democracy in our country, Korea. And would you share your observation about Korean democracy or something like that?
Well, I don't begin to understand the details of what went on. I had met President Yoon, but I was surprised when he declared this state of emergency. And I think the fact that that the institutions in Korea didn't allow this use of the military and a state of emergency meant that there was still a very strong democratic spirit or a political culture in Korea. But I'm not taking sides with either party in Korea. I'm just saying that it does strike me that Korean democracy was stronger than some people had feared.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alan Gold, are you there? Alan?
Yes, I'm here. Thank
Go
you very
ahead,
much.
Alan. Okay.
And thank you for putting this together, Dr. Kim. And very good answers, Joseph Nye. I appreciate your being here, and your statements are very well worded. First of all, I just have one comment for Chung-Soo Lee. You said genocide in Gaza. It's definitely a one-way war, but it is a war, and it wasn't started by Israel. And it's a horrible situation. And had Hamas at any point said they surrender and release the hostages, Israel would have returned, they would have stopped the war and they would help them rebuild. But they can't allow the defeated Hamas to dictate all the terms of surrender. And that's what happened. So they're just trying to release the hostages, number one. I don't know if that's going to happen. Anyway, getting back to South Korea, I'm just wondering if South Korea can do anything to try to convert the minds of the North Koreans, such as distributing pamphlets or the radio stations or other ways of trying to get word out under the table to the civilians who live in North Korea.
Thank
Well,
you, Alan.
My impression is that South Korea has had a long-standing program to do that, but that given the totalitarian nature of the North Korean system, it's very difficult to see it having political effects. I mean, you have defectors, and the defectors, when they either go to China or eventually get to South Korea, they can describe what's going on in North Korea. But it's very hard to see anybody able to mobilize political organizing in North Korea, given the nature of the regime. I've been struck by the descriptions that have been made by reporters of the North Korean troops that have been captured in Ukraine, how brainwashed they are. And I guess it's important for South Korea to try to keep getting information across the border, but I don't expect it's going to work for a while.
Thank you. Alan, do you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm just learning, listening, and learning.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Larry Nix.
Is my mic on?
Go ahead.
Professor Nye, I want to focus. Well, let me just comment about your comment about the North Korean troops. The Ukrainians have captured just a handful,
right,
of North Korean troops. When they have had North Korean troops basically in their grip, many of these troops have committed suicide rather than being taken prisoner by the Ukrainians. This strikes me as very similar to the Japanese military in World War II, where in these big military campaigns, very few Japanese actually surrendered to the Americans. They basically fought to the death or tried to hide out. And I think that really reflects what Mr. Gold was asking about, the extreme difficulty in reaching the North Koreans. My question is about the Ukrainian situation now and the prospect of a negotiation, which it would appear would be aimed at first at creating a ceasefire to actually stop the war. Now, that may be very difficult to do, but that may be the first aim. This issue of security guarantees to Ukraine has come up, and the Trump people have basically said that it is not likely that NATO membership could figure into this at all. Also, I think since membership in NATO requires a 100% vote by all the NATO members, it seems to me you do have two governments that probably would vote against admitting Ukraine, Slovakia and Hungary right now. So the Trump people have basically touted the minerals deal. Get American firms into Ukraine in the situation of a ceasefire, and this would be enough of a deterrent against Putin reigniting the war in the near future. Now, a lot of people have doubts about that. I certainly have doubts about whether that would deter Putin or not, to see a few American businessmen in Ukraine. But if that isn't going to work, and if NATO membership appears to be a bridge too far for Ukraine, what other security guarantees could be offered to Ukraine that would give some substance of deterrence so that Putin would decide after a certain period of time to resume aggression and break a ceasefire against Ukraine? Are there alternative security guarantees that we ought to be considering?
Well, I think you're correct that with Hungary and Slovakia opposing Ukraine's being in NATO, it's not going to happen. My own view on this is if there's a minerals deal, that's good, but it's not sufficient. I think the best suggestions I've heard is what's sometimes called the Korean solution for Ukraine, which is creating a 10-mile wide demilitarized zone along the current line of control and having it policed by troops from other European countries, not UN Blue Helmets, but countries like Britain and France and Germany and others. And so that if Putin does try to cross that zone and resume his aggression, he's going to have to kill some French and British, and that immediately gets into the question of the French and the British nuclear guarantees. And the French have been offering to extend their nuclear deterrent over other European countries. So I think that what I would hope, but I doubt the Trump administration will do, is that the Americans will say, we're not putting troops there, but if you attack our allies, it'll trigger Article 5 of NATO. And so that gives another form of security guarantee. But that's, I guess, the direction I would try to move. But I don't have any idea whether Trump will move there.
Thank you, Joe. Chung-Soo, go ahead.
I have a question about NATO. Do you think that NATO will survive in the long run? Because let me give you an example. In Romania recently, there was a candidate, Colin Georgescu, who called for a referendum on EU and NATO. Apparently, he's against those two, and he's also against Ukrainian help. And yet, his election was nullified, and then he tried to re-register as a candidate once again for a renewed election, and report says that he was arrested and so on. But so the Romanian people is demonstrating in Bucharest in a great number, calling for him to run again and so on. So given this development, my guess is that the mass of the Romanians, maybe the youngsters, maybe, are against the NATO. Romania joining, it's already joined, but remaining as a member of NATO. And given the rise of right wing all over Germany and so on, Italy, is NATO under threat, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know enough about Romania to be able to give you a good answer to the Romanian situation. My understanding was that the Russians had been heavily involved with misinformation and money, which had affected the first round of the election, which is why it was canceled. And so I don't know what real opinion is in Romania. But your larger point, which is that nationalist populism, which you see in many European countries, I mean, like the AfD in Germany or Le Pen in France and so forth, is certainly not an alliance type of movement. On the other hand, there is still a concern about Russian power. In other words, even nationalist populists don't want to be controlled by Russia. And so will NATO deteriorate? I think not unless the Americans pull out. But could it become weaker because of less support among some governments? That's possible.
Thank
Any
you.
follow-up, Chung-Soo?
Well, if I may, if you remember, I'm sure you remember, President Yeltsin wanted to join NATO, and it's the West that denied that desire. I mean, President Yeltsin even came to Washington, D.C. and ordered Coca-Cola and Domino Pizza. I mean, he loved those pizza and so on. So what happened to this Russia joining NATO? I mean, wasn't that a huge loss of chance? If at that time, Soviet Union or Russia, I don't know which it was at that time, had joined NATO, wouldn't we have a totally different world, a better world?
Well, I think it's possible, and there were efforts to there was a committee in Brussels, which was the Russian NATO planning committee, which was ways to try to get transparency and improved relations between Russia and NATO. I think, though, the question is, imagine that Russia had been formally admitted to NATO, and that all the countries had voted to allow that. You still have to ask, what were the internal conditions in Russia? And the internal conditions in Russia was that Russia was still suffering from, decades of communism. Its economy was in terrible shape. You'd had more or less a plundering of the state-owned industries, and they're taken over by the various oligarchs who were struggling against each other. Yeltsin has begun to lose control. By the latter half of the 90s, you have the Chechen rebellion and the Chechen wars. So essentially, you could argue that the deterioration in Russia, which was independent of whether NATO existed or not, was what caused Putinism. I think that's, and then of course, if Putin was able to use NATO as a justification for his positions, but I think you probably would have wound up with Putin or somebody like Putin in any case because of the internal problems. But again, these are counterfactual histories which are hard to prove.
Thank you. Yoon Young-Kwan, do you have any additional questions? Turn on your microphone, please. Turn on your microphone. Okay.
I don't have any additional question to Professor Nye. I just appreciate his insight. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Well,
thank you.
I'm going to have to make some phone calls.
Yes.
Before it gets too late. So
okay.
We may want to think about bringing our discussion to an end.
To close. Okay. Let's give Professor Nye a big round of applause. Thank you very much, Joe, and we'll get back to you.
Well, thank you, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Professor.
We'll look for another time.
Thank you. Take
Okay.
care. Thank you.
Bye.
All right.